Can you have a relationship with a thing? Not really. Can you have a relationship with a God with a little g? Well, you're not sure. You're just trying different things. You do religious ceremonies. Can you have a relationship with Jesus? Absolutely, because he's a real person.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you learn and grow in your faith. It is a journey of faith that you have to go on. It is not something that you can opt out of, like spam calls or things like that. You instead are required to do it, and you're either growing or getting weaker in your faith. But we want to be the Salty Pastor Gym, where you pump your faith up and make it strong and powerful and know what you believe and why you believe it. And that's the only thing we can do. Ultimately, to help you is just encourage you and come alongside you and challenge you, but you have to do the work. It's not something we can do for you. So
we give you the tools, and we give you the truth, and we give you this the focus and the encouragement and the inspiration and the hope, and we desire that to just really stimulate your own growth.
Absolutely. So my name is Jesse Maher. I'll be your host, and we can't do this without the Salty Pastor himself, whose voice you heard if you're not watching already on our YouTube channel. Dr. Douglas Peake. Welcome back, Pastor. We missed you. We always love having Pastor Harv on. That is a fact.
Yes.
But it's always a little bit different without you, Pastor.
Well, it's good to be back, and I'm glad I'm here, and we're on that last little few days before the Christmas Eve service celebration. Very excited.
And I will say you're sounding a little congested. How are you feeling? You've been battling some illness over the last week as well.
Yeah, well, probably the last 9 to 10 days of my life have just been, boy, I was really sick, and I'm just now coming out of it. I'm about 70%, I'd say. I'm just still having it. I thought at first it was a really bad case of COVID, but I got tested, and they kept coming back negative. And so they think it's a really unique strain of the flu, and
that's been going around. We've heard some pretty rough reports.
Some pretty rough reports of it. It just hit me pretty rough, I guess, and so I'm still trying to come out of it.
We'll be praying for you.
Thank you.
If you guys hear his demeanor and tone be a little different, just give him grace. But he wanted to make sure he was here for you guys. He wanted to make sure as we head into Christmas, we are giving you the Salty Pastor podcast that you all love and crave.
Finish the year strong.
Yes, absolutely. So this weekend is the culmination of our celebration of Christmas.
Yes.
I was thinking about how Christianity has brought so many celebrations to society that they all enjoy now, whether they'll admit it or not, where they came from. Society really loves some of the celebrations that Christianity came up with.
Yeah, now they're trying to steal them away from Christianity by practicing, it's called in logic, the fallacy of Genesis. And so what they do is they're like, well, I'm going to try to describe where this came from, and that invalidates it. Well, first of all, that's a logical fallacy. So anybody and everybody who does this, can I be salty for a moment?
Always.
Is an idiot. But second of all, it's just historically inaccurate, you know. One of the biggest things that happens in our world today, this is really popular among millennials, is this whole notion of, well, Christmas and the trees and all that is all about Saturnalia, you know. And it's been popularized in media. The sitcom The Big Bang Theory?
I do.
Are you familiar with that? Well, there's a video of Sheldon talking about it, and a lot of people believe this to be the case, you know, because Sheldon is supposedly like the highest IQ person in the show, right?
Right.
You know, and he's winning Nobel Prizes and all this kind of stuff. So I have a video here real quick. It's only about 40 seconds, but let's show it.
Sheldon, are you and Leonard putting up a Christmas tree?
No, because we don't celebrate the ancient pagan festival of Saturnalia.
Saturnalia?
Gather round, kids. It's time for Sheldon's beloved Christmas special.
In the pre-Christian era, as the winter solstice approached and the plants died, pagans brought evergreen boughs into their homes as an act of sympathetic magic intended to guard the life essences of the plants until spring. This custom was later appropriated by Northern Europeans, and eventually it becomes the so-called Christmas tree.
And that, Charlie Brown, is what boredom is all about.
Well, there you have it. The old myth that it was a pre-Christian. That was really interesting. He noticed how he said that.
Yes.
Pre-Christian thing and blah, 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 blah. The problem with it is this is all complete bunk. First and foremost, the reason why we celebrate Christmas, the birth of Christ, on December 25th is because Mary was believed to have become pregnant on Passover, in April. So if you add 40 weeks to the Passover in that time frame, it's December 25th.
Right.
And what you'll always notice, this is the other biggest flaw in the logic about this whole notion of Saturnalia, is that Saturnalia wasn't even celebrated at this time. It was never celebrated by the Roman Empire ever. There was a ceremony called Sol that they instituted, but that wasn't until the 4th century AD, after Christ
after
was
Christ had already
400 years after
come.
and it was an attempt by one of the Roman emperors to make Helios the god of sun. It was his family crest or whatever.
Right.
He tried to reform Rome and bring it back, but that didn't work. As a matter of fact, from the earliest on, there is a carving in the Vatican today about an early guy by the name of Hippolytus. And the way you say his name is Hippolytus, Hippolytus of Rome. And he lived in the early 3rd century, so around 220. Okay, so he was 100 years before Constantine the emperor, who was the first Christian emperor of Rome.
Okay.
So prior to that, and he talked in his writings how earlier people celebrated the birth of Jesus on December 25th. Saturnalia was something that they never celebrated. It had nothing to do with it, but it's about the solstice, which is usually around the 20th or the 21st of December, which is the shortest day of the year, right?
Yes.
Because the tilt of the planet is the farthest away. However, the whole notion of Saturnalia is also discredited by the fact is that these people live very close to the equator. The closer you get to the equator, the less that has an impact on the seasonal cycles. For instance, way up here, we're pretty far north.
Yes.
Right? And so
we are feeling that northern.
Yeah, the shortest day of the year, tomorrow, is not fun. The sun comes up at 8 and it goes down at 5, and you're like, man, it's freezing. And you don't get a lot of sun. But the closer you get to the equator, that effect is mitigated, meaning it's not nearly as dramatic. And so the differences are so much fewer and far between. And so it has nothing to do with that. Hippolytus, talks about how it was based on the notion that the early church believed that Mary became pregnant at Passover. And when you just add the math for the gestation period, it's 40 weeks, you end at December 25th. Okay. So that's a pretty significant shift, I think. And
but even if that aspect is not even accurate, what if he was born middle of fall?
Sure.
The idea of just celebrating the fact that he came here is just as important. It doesn't really matter. Like, there's a Shakespearean birthday, right? We don't know the exact date of Shakespeare's birth. We kind of assigned him one and just said, here it is. We're just going to celebrate that Shakespeare was alive.
Yes.
This is a very similar idea, right? We don't know for sure, but it doesn't really matter. It's like, it's the same thing. I mean, this is super, super, super unimportant, but it's like, when I adopted my dog, they don't know when his birthday was.
Yeah.
So they said it's May 1st.
But you have a dog.
I have a dog. And so I was like,
he's your dog.
He's my dog. He exists. And just because I don't know when he's born doesn't mean I don't go, okay, well, he still has 9 years on this planet. And we're just going to assume that it was the 1st of May because that's when they thought it was. And it's not that big of a deal. He was still here. We still celebrate that he exists. And that's what matters. It doesn't matter if it's on the 25th of December or we did it in, some people have been pushing for Christmas in July for a long time. We could do it in July if that's what people are really excited about, but whatever.
Exactly. And I think the point of that is simply this, is that the notion that the birth of Christ and its celebration was taken to preempt a pagan ceremony because the people were pagan is a complete myth. It's a fallacy. It's a lie. And young people are taught this in popular media to try to discredit the veracity, the foundational aspects of Christianity and what it stood for. These people who studied it, they took it seriously. They took this stuff seriously because they were serious people. They were not this shallow media, Hollywood, materialistic driven type people that most of the people are today.
Right.
They weren't like that at all. They were completely different.
Back then.
Yeah, they were made very differently back
Well,
then.
and what I think is interesting is, so we see the scientific evidence, we see these people that spend a lot of time studying this and doing this, and then we see what the culture has done as far as going, this is this, and you just know this, and we see that example in the video clip that we watched. It's really hard for people to find their way home. They're kind of directionless because they're getting 500 different messages, and especially with the internet now, people can say anything they want, and the legitimacy of it is mediocre at best for most of it, right? And so our world basically mixes up all of the directions and covers up things all the time. So it can be really hard if you're lost and you're trying to find truth to find your way home to truth.
Yeah, and that's what I talk about all the time about the difficulty of deconstructionism, and that is that people spend all their time saying, well, this is why you can't believe in Jesus. You can't believe this. You can't believe this. But very, very few people stand up and say, but this is what we actually do believe.
Right.
And so nobody knows what they actually believe. What they're really, really good about is telling themselves what they don't believe.
Yes.
But the problem with that is you never live life because you don't believe in life. You don't even believe in yourself. You don't believe in your reality. You don't believe in love. You don't believe in anything.
Right.
And it's like, man, what a cynical way to live. And this is why deconstructionism and postmodernism always leads to absolute hopelessness, meaninglessness. And this is why the suicide rate amongst millennials and Gen Z is at its highest it's ever been since they've been tracking it for centuries.
Absolutely.
And they're just absolutely shocked. And what's amazing about the birth of Christ and why we still celebrate it and why we make these affirmations is because it's not only true saying, hey, you can believe that this is true, it also says this is how it happens. These are the directions. This is how you do come home. This is how you find yourself. This is how you discover who you were meant to be. This explains why you are the way you are.
It's clearer than those IKEA assembly guides.
Absolutely. One of the greatest truths in the birth of Jesus Christ is the actual directions. The step-by-step things that happen in your own life, the steps you take in order to come to faith. And that is, you can't go home if you don't know how to get there. And the birth of Jesus, Christmas, actually tells you the directions on how to get there. And that's what's really amazing. If you step back for a moment and ask yourself this question, and that is, how do I have a relationship with a thing? Okay? Let's say you have a car, right? Now, my first car wouldn't go in reverse. It was a VW Scirocco, and it was a little 4-speed. And in order to get it to go into reverse, the linkage got out of whack. And so I always had to park in ways that I could like roll forward, or go forward. I couldn't park and have to back out, or I'd have to push it out. And so the relationship I had with my car is don't ever park where you have to back out,
Right.
Don't ever do that until I could fix it. And that took quite a while, but I was eventually able to do that. Now let me, earlier you said you have a dog.
Yes.
How do you have a relationship with your dog?
I mean, I'm basically his caregiver. I mean, I don't know. What do you mean by relationship?
Okay. Well, yeah, that you're proving my point. And that is that well, I have a dog. I know my dog. I love my dog. I take care of my dog. Well, what do you mean a relationship with my dog?
Right.
Because it's like, well, I sort of do and I sort of don't.
Right.
Because it's just odd. What about a relationship with a person, though? Can you evaluate whether you have relationships with people?
I mean, yeah, we understand a relationship with a person much better because we have more of them and they are more. I don't know, Pastor. You're making me think too hard. I thought you were the one that
was supposed to do all of this. Well, let me ask you a question. Is a God, not God of gods, Lord of lords, but God, a God, like let's take Brahma or Dharma or what these people said, or in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament, excuse me, they talked about Baal, these gods, or Ashtoreth, or these other gods, these pagan gods of the Roman kind of pagan religious Mount Zeus sort of a thing.
Right.
And so are those gods, are they more like a thing? Are they more like a pet? Or are they more like persons?
I guess inherently we understand how to have a relationship with a person innately, right? Like
yes.
That comes natural, and obviously that looks different for every person and how they do that. But for the most part, we understand how friendships work, romantic relationships work, all these things. With a God, that's significantly less clear. And, a thing as well. It's like, I don't know, how do you have a relationship with a thing? Like, and Pastor Harv talked about this. Like, we have relationships with brands now, and that's almost become more natural to us than talking to each other. But for the most part, you can walk in and understand how to have a relationship with someone. As far as having a relationship with a God, that's significantly more.
So God becoming a man, Jesus, says what about the directions? It says the way you know God is by knowing Jesus. You see? And John records this in chapter 14 of his gospel. Let me read the following words. Jesus is talking to his disciples. His disciples are troubled, okay? He says, verse 1, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. So he just says, what is he saying? He's saying, look, don't worry about it. I'm going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house, and I'll come back and get you. You know where I'm going. So, of course, Thomas, the brightest bulb in the apostleship, says, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way?
We love Thomas. Thomas keeps it simple for the rest of us.
So the teacher just says, you know the way to the place where I am going. And the first thing he blurts out of his mouth is what? We don't know where you're going. No. Could you just see Jesus for a second?
I don't know what's going on.
I think if I were in that position and I was Jesus, I'd hit my head against the wall and just say, I just told you, you dimwit. But no, Jesus is God. He's not me. Praise God for that.
Yep. He's got more patience than we do.
He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. And from now on, you do know him and have seen him. So he's saying, you know him, you've seen him because you know me. Philip said, well, Lord, just show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus answers, don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you for such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing this work or his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. So you see, Jesus is saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And what he's doing is he's saying some very specific things about the directions on how to get home. He goes, first, he says, look, the you that is you is spiritual in nature. You have a soul. And this is about your heart. And your heart is troubled. Your heart is upset. Your heart is dissatisfied. And when your heart is troubled, you're troubled. Your life won't make any sense. And our biggest trouble in life is not having a place where we belong. We live completely isolated lives. The revelation of the pandemic is how lonely and isolated people are, and second of all, how devastating it is to live in isolation. We look at what happened to kids who weren't able to go to school. And we thought, well, as long as we have them pull up their computers and they get on there, they're going to get the same information, they're going to be fine. And it turns out, no, they've lost years off of their education. Their IQ development slowed down. Their educational process was stunted. Why? Because they were in isolation and they were removed from people. Isolation is the greatest struggle of the human heart. And sometimes we can even be with people and around people and still feel all alone. Our hearts are troubled because we don't know who we are and we don't know the place where we belong. And we grow up in a society where mass media tells us you can't believe Jesus because that's a myth or a joke. And so the first thing he's saying is that you have to know that there is a place where you belong for your soul.
So I think, like you said, that sense of belonging and having community, really,
yes, community
is so important, because us here in Idaho, we didn't suffer nearly as bad on the lockdown as a lot of people did. And I talked to some of my friends in more liberal states that really locked down.
Yeah, very isolated.
And it was like they're traumatized over it.
Yes.
Like they were like, we're like not, and so it's like they're just now kind of getting back to normal, and it's like it was really, really, really hard for them. And so if you're living your whole life that way, where you're living in complete isolation from your spiritual home, that can also be very traumatic, and it can also really affect how you operate and how you function.
Could you imagine for just a moment if you were born into the pandemic during the lockdown and you lived your whole life till you were 25 that way? I mean, just extend that for a little bit. Right now, I mean, the unrest in China is unbelievable because they're trying to have this zero COVID policy, and they're trying to, and people just, they cannot live this way. And yet, spiritually, that's how we are born and raised. We were born alone, isolated, in a pandemic of sin and lockdowns, away from God.
Right.
And we have people telling us that you need to stay away from God, stay away from Him. There is no place for you. There is no, freedom from this pandemic. And yet Jesus comes, and in the midst of his
kicks the door in,
and he kicks the door in, and he just says, "Look, I am the way, and where my Father's house has many rooms. There is a place where you belong. There is a place where you're home. You are not isolated. You are not alone. You are not spiritually abandoned. You have a soul, and I have come to save you. I've come to save your soul. I've come to save you from the pandemic. I've come to save you from this corona of evil that is trying to destroy you. And I'm not just a vaccine, I'm a whole new immune system. And so I've come, and the place where we belong is when we listen to Jesus and say, yes, you're right. Where God is where I belong. It's represented through Jesus' words as a home or a house. God doesn't have a house. When I was little, I thought, oh, God has this big house with lots of rooms in it. That's not the point.
There's kid songs even about big houses with lots and lots of rooms.
Yes. And so it's a metaphor for crying out loud, and saying, and the point is that there's always room for you because you belong there. You are not meant to be alone spiritually or even materially in this world.
Yeah, I think like you said, like we've been talking about, the pandemic really opened our eyes to the need for that and to the need for belonging, because it's like there was a lot of churches that chose to shut down as well during the pandemic.
Yes.
And the amount of people that joined our church for the time that the pandemic was going was crazy, because they're like, we just want someone to spiritually lead us, and our church shut down and no one will talk to us.
Yeah.
And we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. And this is the time we want and need God more than ever, and we're feeling abandoned. And so it's like, not all those people stayed. A lot of them went back to their old church, and that's totally fine. We're happy to be that spiritual refuge for them during that time. But it just showed people still need that care, still need that belonging, still need that home spiritually, even when others are going to fail them. So,
well, and I think that's what's so significant about Jesus is he came into the midst of this world that was filled with, all the mess. And he's saying, look, I've come to show you the way home. Number one, there is a home. You belong there. And this is how you find it. You find your way back when you find me. And Thomas said, well, we don't know where you're going. And he goes, well, wait a second. It's not where I'm going. I'm not a means to an end, right? I'm not your bus driver in life.
Right.
What I am is I am the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. I am the way. By knowing me, you know God, because the Father is in me and I am in the Father. I don't do anything apart from my Father. So what he's saying is that, look, here is the Trinity. We are one. We're distinct persons, but we're different as distinct personalities or manifestations, but we're all one. We're not independent of each other. We are together as one. And so that's what we talked about earlier, I believe, when we were talking about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Gospel of John talks about that. I'm going to bring this up in a teaching during the Christmas special on December 25th that I want people to sit down and watch with their families. We're going to talk about that, how the difference between the Gospel of Mark. Do you know what the Gospel of Mark, which was the first biography of the life of Jesus written by John Mark, do you know where it starts? It starts with the baptism of Jesus.
It skips the whole...
Yeah.
It skips the prequels.
It does. It skips everything.
It skips right to the starting point.
Yeah, it starts with the baptism of
ministry.
Jesus. Yeah, his ministry. But what's really interesting is then you read the Gospel according to John, which was the last biography written. And there's probably a 20, 30-year gap maybe between those two. We don't know quite sure. But what's really fascinating about it is that in there he goes, chapter 1, verse 1 of the Gospel according to John, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that is so fascinating. And then in verse 14 it says, and then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So John says, wait a second. The coming of Christ and his birth is part of the invitation to return home, because this is how we know we can return home, because Jesus is God. He came from home.
He was flesh, but he wasn't just some guy. He was from God.
Absolutely.
And he is God, right?
Absolutely. And so that's what's critical in this invitation, is that we find our way home by finding Jesus. It's in him. Can you have a relationship with a thing? Not really. Can you have a relationship with a God with the little g? Well, you're not sure. You're just trying different things. You do religious ceremonies. Can you have a relationship with Jesus? Absolutely, because he's a real person.
So Jesus is not only telling us there's a place where we belong, but
this is how you get there.
How to get there. Absolutely. Well, we thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for being with us this whole year as part of the Salty Pastor crew. We're going to have another episode on Thursday. Make sure you tune in for that. And then obviously this Saturday, we're doing Christmas Eve services at 2, 3:30, and 5 on campus. And then Those will also be broadcast online, and then an additional 4 that will be online only, and it's going to be great. Make sure you go to foothills.org/Christmas if you have questions about how to do Christmas. And then obviously, like Pastor Doug said, we've got a whole Christmas service debuting on Christmas Day, Sunday, December 25th, for you to watch with your family at home, since we're all about home this year.
Yes.
We want to focus on you guys being at home with your family. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you on Thursday here on the Salty Pastor Podcast.
Merry Christmas.